Hello and welcome to AJ Bell Luminary. I'm Danny Hewson, a financial analyst with AJ Bell, and I'm delighted to be your host for this event. We are now back out on the road, so if you do get a chance to join us at one of our in-person events, we'd be delighted to see you. But lives, of course, are busy, and that is why we are also delivering our Luminary event as a webinar. Today's session will last around 2 hours with a short break to grab refreshments and take a 5-minute break from your screen. You can ask questions throughout the session via the chat function, and our team will ensure that the questions reach the relevant speaker, and we'll come back to you as quickly as we can. You can also put any questions or comments on the feedback page that's going to pop up immediately after the webinar finishes. Now, I know many of you have joined us at one of our previous Luminary events, but for those of you who are new to the event, I'm going to briefly outline what it is all about. AJ Bell introduced Luminary to the event schedule when research into our events highlighted regular feedback from delegates requesting us to feature more female speakers on our seminar lineups. We're also incredibly mindful that female delegates make up about 20% of our audience, and therefore we wanted to produce an event that's a little different than our typical roadshow session. Luminary provides a blend of motivational, inspirational and educational sessions by a primarily female speaker lineup. And whilst we are providing a spotlight for the leading ladies in our business and industry, please do note everybody is welcome. This event supports diversity in financial services, and diversity means inclusion and an invitation for all. Now, we are 6 years into our Luminary events and are committed to ensuring that we provide this event for the foreseeable future. So if you do enjoy the sessions today, please do pass a recommendation out to your colleagues. Today, we're looking forward to sessions from some really insightful speakers. We'll be delighted for you to share your experiences with as many people as possible. So if you're on Twitter or LinkedIn, feel free to post any photos or views using the hashtag AJBellLuminary. Right, now I hope you are sitting comfortably wherever you are watching this. Our first speaker is AJ Bell's Business Development Manager for the Southeast. He's been with the company for 5 years, starting in operations before looking after accounts in Scotland, Northern Ireland and the Midlands before landing in the Southeast North region. Marcus Parajuk is going to be providing an overview of the platform market changes. He's also going to talk about diversity and inclusion initiatives, the ones that we've been working on over the last 12 months and where we hope those initiatives might take us. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus Parajuk.
Thanks for the introduction, Danny. For those that don't know, my name is Marcus Parajuk. I'm the Business Development Manager for the Southeast North region here at AJ Bell Invest Centre. As part of this Luminary session, I'm going to take you through a quick platform market update, including some financials and some information about proposition as well. We'll kick off covering off our financial strength. The attached results come from our end of year 21 results, which came out in October last year. As you can see across the board, there's been strong growth as part of this. In terms of retail customer numbers, we're up 30%. Assets under administration, we're up 29%, and revenue, we're up 15% with PBT at 13% as well. Since we've been going back out on the road with advisors since the COVID period, financial strength for the company has been increasingly coming up when they've been conducting their due diligence. And I think that's because the platform market space has had a lot of changes over the past couple of years. There's been a lot of private equity come into it. There's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions as well. With our financial strength, it puts us in the strongest possible position to kind of remain independent and keep doing what we're doing. Taking that back a little bit further, if we look over the past 6 years, retail customer numbers, we can see has had strong growth. Assets under administration has had strong growth as well. It's worth mentioning that that growth is all organic growth, working with individual financial advisors like yourselves to get there. We're not in the business of going out and acquiring huge books of business, migrating that to ourselves from different platforms, for example. AJ Bell Investments, again, has seen great growth. That's been running for 5 years now. You may have seen Kevin Durant put out a video overviewing the past 5 years and how that's been with ourselves. Over the past year, we've seen assets under administration increase 175% from 1 billion up to 2.2 billion, and there's strong trajectory for that continued growth as well moving forward. I'll cover off now the range of products and investments which we have at AJ Bell as a bit of a recap. SIP, as a lot of people will know us for, it's where we started off back in 1995 as SIP and SAS Actuaries. That SIP gives you access through to the platform, the funds and share service, but also access through to bespoke discretionary managers as well. You can go off panel where you want with the investments. So you can look at fixed term investment accounts, trustee investment plans. You can go wherever you want to. As part of a segmentation exercise, we launched a platform focused pension, which is called the retirement investment account. We will cover off the differences in charges in that shortly. Stocks and shares ISA, that is now a flexible ISA, so you can withdraw funds and add them back in the same tax year, and clients aren't impacted about that. And then also the general investment account product as well. General investment account, it has a lot of different entities which can be held underneath that, including different trust type schemes. So we can set up bare trusts, discretionary trusts, you kind of name it, you can go wherever you want with that. You can set up registered pension scheme accounts if you want to hold our RGIA within a different pension. We can open corporate accounts, charity cases, of course, individual and joint accounts on that side as well. Some of the more niche products on the advice side are the family products. So the junior SIP, the lifetime ISA, and junior ISA. There aren't a lot of competitors which do have these products, and advisors like that we have these products because you can keep all of the family's investments under one roof. They can also be linked for viewing purposes to kind of lead family members who look after the finances. Which again, it just makes it nice and easy. Everything can be viewed under one login from a client perspective. Offshore bonds, relatively new. Again, we now facilitate those on behalf of Canada Life, Utmost, and Quilter International. You can hold the custody on our platform. They administer the bond at their end. Again, just so everything can be kept under one house. On the investment side, we'll initially look at the managed portfolio service. Again, we have a commitment to cost on the investment side similar to the platform. Whatever portfolio you're going for, we take a 15 basis point AMC to manage that. They are risk targeted and outcome orientated portfolios. We risk profile to a lot of the big risk profiles that are out there. I'll cover that off on the next slide. And they're available across a range of different orientations. So we have growth portfolios on the active side, passive, blended, and we have responsible ranges as well. We also have active and passive ranges on the income side of that. Just looking at the other facet of the investment business, the multi-asset fund side. So we have 6 growth funds which mimic our passive MPS and follow the asset allocation which we have in there, and we have 2 income portfolios as well. As part of that, they follow the same charging structure as I said. We're agnostic. We charge 15 basis points regardless of the portfolio which we're managing. And again, these are available on our platform and across a range of other platforms as well. In terms of risk profiling, we risk profile to a lot of the big ATRs which are out there, from Dynamic Planner to eValue, Phenometrica, Synaptics, De facto, and Oxford Risk as well, covering the vast majority of the market space. We'll recap off our price of the platform now as well. Standard platform charging, so 20 basis points up to $1 million. That then tiers to 15 basis points up to 1.5 million. That tiers to 10 basis points up to 2 million. And then we cap our charges at £2 million. That charging structure is correct for all of the accounts, but there is one differential, and that's the retirement investment account. In terms of the retirement investment account, so it's a segmentation exercise why we brought this out. The STIP, you can access the platform, but there were some fixed fees on the pension if a client didn't have 200k on the platform. To combat that, clients under the value of 200k on the pension side didn't get the most competitive charging structure. So we brought out the retirement investment account. So this delivers an all-in pricing of 0.25, so there's no charges for account setup, transfers in, ongoing administration, online dealing, or income drawdown. This now means AJ Bell are competitive across the board, no matter what the client size is that you have with ourselves. Let's break down the investment portfolios a little bit further. So we have the 6 growth portfolios and then the 2 income orientated portfolios at the end. The 6 multi-asset funds, you can see here, we have a cap at 0.31%. That includes our 15 basis point AMC. And then we have the different ranges you can see down the left-hand side of the MPS portfolios. The passive, the active, the pactive, and the responsible range as well. We take a balanced passive MPS that comes in at 0.28%, which includes the 15 basis point AMC. You just need to include the platform charge on top of that. All of this information is available on our website, investcentre.co.uk. You can find out more information about the platform on there and also about the investment range. Likewise, you can speak to any of the business development team for more information on that as well. Next, we'll take a look at AJ Bell's focus on diversity and inclusion. And firstly, we may as well start that off with the appointment of Helena as the chair of our board. Helena joins us from an esteemed career across various different sectors on the financial services side. And we can see her input channeling through the business already. She's recently started up an employee voice forum, but I won't cover too much off on that because I know she's going to be discussing it on her session. Just as a bit of a background on Helena, so she set something up which was called the 30% Club. This was made up of key individuals of part of the FTSE 100 firms to advocate diversity and change into their business. As part of that, to date, we're now at about 39% of the FTSE 100 firms having females as at the top of those. Also worth mentioning on that point, the additions of Margaret and Evelyn, who have also joined the board as independent members to provide their governance as well. So Luminary, it started out in 2017, and we've now taken this tour nationally with visit in Belfast, in Manchester and London, as well as the virtual session which you're attending here today. As part of that, there's diversified talks where we ensure not only to educate but inspire women as well from a range of different topics. We're also looking to continually add to this tour which we run. So there's more sessions to come, looking at specific lunches and single speaker sessions as well. But again, all ideas are welcome, and we'd really appreciate your feedback as part of that. There's been a couple of changes to the business development team, so I thought I would also cover that off. Danny now heads up the northern regions with the BDMs covering underneath him. We have Kenny, who's recently joined, and Billy in the past couple of months. Matthew and Andy have been with us for the past few years, so you know them. Alison also now covers off the sales. Myself, Ryan, look after those regions. I'd just like to thank you for your time today, and hopefully you've enjoyed this Luminary session.
Thank you, Marcus. If anybody would like to hear more about our platform or investment range, or you've got any platform related questions, just pop those on your feedback form and either Marcus or the support team will get back to you. Now, we're very pleased to introduce our first guest speaker, Belinda O'Neill is the author and founder of Be Inspired to Be. She's had quite a journey from bank manager to brand founder, and she has had huge success harnessing the power of social media for good. With tips on how to make socials work for you, Belinda O'Neill.
Hello everyone, just want to introduce myself. My name is Belinda O'Neill and I am the founder of Be Inspired to Be. I'm delighted to be here and chatting to you today. I'm really going to share a little bit of my story. I do come from a finance background and I've recently made a change of taking a leap of faith. So I'd just like to share a little bit of my backstory with you and the journey that I've been on over the last few years. So basically, I was in banking and had been for almost 25 years. Very fortunate, I've had a wonderful career in banking, became the youngest manager at the age of 25 and then the youngest senior manager at the age of 28. So I did reach that senior management level, which was just wonderful. But I suppose the journey has evolved and I evolved as the years went by, and I did spend quite a long part of my adult life, if you like, in that one bank. But as I say, the journey was fantastic and I'm extremely grateful for it. But a few things happened. I suppose back in 2015, if I take you back to then, I looked at my CV, as we all tend to do every now and again, and I sort of saw a gap in it in terms of professionalisation. And the bank at that time were very pro professionalisation and were willing to support employees who wanted to gain a qualification. Now, the obvious choice would have been probably to do banking exams, and I did explore that, but there was something in me wanting to do something a wee bit broader. So I signed up to a developing managers course through the Ulster University, and I commenced that part-time whilst working full-time, and I am a mummy as well. So it was tough to juggle it all, but it was a wonderful experience, and I successfully graduated in 2016. And through that journey, it was all assignment based, so there was a lot of writing involved in it. And I suppose when I look back at my career as well, a lot of what I was doing in the bank involved writing, because I was supporting businesses in terms of their finance needs. And with that, you obviously have to write a story about that business and submit that to credit department. So when I do look back, I suppose there was a lot of writing involved throughout my career. But the university journey really reignited a love of creative writing. And I loved the whole referencing and the Harvard Business referencing and the quotes and all of that. I really just enjoyed that part of it. And I suppose at that stage, I started to write a little quote here and there, and I started to share it on my own personal social media page, as we all tend to do. And I was starting to get a bit of feedback from friends saying, really resonated with your words today. And, it was probably just a wee bit sort of more encouraging for me then to continue on with that writing journey. And I suppose I had an idea in the back of my head for a brand to set up a separate writing page rather than sharing my odd quote on my personal page. And initially it was called Be Inspired by Be, because obviously my name is Belinda and my friends call me Be, but really the whole purpose behind it was a wee bit deeper than that. So Be Inspired to Be was the name that basically was in the back of my mind. But like everyone, whenever we have these thoughts of maybe making a change or putting ourselves out there, you have that noise going on in the back of your head saying, well, you're a senior bank manager, so what would you be doing that for? And you constantly think about what other people might say. And in most cases, we tend to maybe go to that negative place and we start to have that sort of self-doubt. So I suppose I didn't act upon it at that point in time. But on the 1st of January 2017, a major change happened in my personal life, and that was a shock cancer diagnosis for someone whom I love very, very much. And it literally came in the form of a phone call. So literally within moments, my life changed. And it was literally in the days following that phone call, and you're trying to digest with the news and take it all in. And I wasn't probably in the best place at that point in time. I probably wasn't handling it very well. And it was really then that I turned to my writing. And I said, you know, my family needs me, I need to be strong, I need to get into a more positive frame of mind. And I really turned to my writing at that point in time, and it really became a form of self-therapy for me. And really it was during the next few weeks after that news in early January when I said to myself, what is holding me back in establishing this idea of Be Inspired to Be? And really, you know, when I was writing the words and they were helping me on a regular basis, well, maybe I could help a few others along the way. So I took that leap of faith and dug deep with the courage inside, and I set up Be Inspired to Be, initially on Facebook, to be fair. And it was slow. You know, my friends just started to follow me, as they tend to do, which is wonderful to have that support. And occasionally I started to share an odd quote, an odd piece that I was writing. And again, I was starting to get lovely feedback from people saying that really resonated with me, that really helped me. So the journey continued, and it was slow. I was still working full time, still fully engaged in my job in the bank, and dealing with the cancer diagnosis for my family member, and there was lots of hospital appointments. So trying to balance it all and be a mommy and be a wife and be all those things, and try to take care of myself in the middle of it all too. And as I say, that's when the writing really, really helped me. That was my downtime. So as the journey progressed, I hosted a Be Inspired to Be charity event in 2017 in that November of that year. And that was great. It was great to have the support of friends and family. My sister supported me with that event, and we had 300 ladies in attendance. It was a ladies only event, and we raised £7,000. And that was absolutely brilliant, and the buzz from that was excellent, and also to give back to cancer charities and to support those who had supported our family member was really important to us. 2018 continued on with the writing. Again, it was on an occasional basis, was really busy in work, as we all tend to be, and I decided to host a second Be Inspired to Be charity event, and I hosted it in the November of 2018, again with the support of my sister, and again it sold out and we raised a further £7,000 for charity. In 2019, I actually met a random meeting with a former teacher of mine, and she was a person who really influenced me positively whilst I was at school. So it was a very opportune meeting, I suppose. It was very random, but it was wonderful to see her. And she tapped me on the shoulder, and we just had a little chat. And she said, you know, I love the bits and pieces that you share, the quotes, and I was writing an odd poem as well, inspirational poems. And she said, you know, really, really resonate with some of the things that you're writing, and I really think they're fantastic. And I said, well, you know, you do know that I write them myself. And she says, well, actually, no, I wasn't sure. And I said, well, yes, it's all self-penned. And she said to me, you have to write a book. You have to publish this work. You have to create a book. And she was an artist. And a few days after our meeting, she messaged me and she said, if you decide to pursue the book idea, I will illustrate your front cover. She says, now that's an opportunity you can't pass up. And she was absolutely right. So that was 2019. And this idea of the book was probably growing in the back of my mind. And social media was indeed growing slowly and steadily. And basically on the 1st of September 2019, I made a change in terms of I decided to write every day for a year. I set myself a target to write every day for a year because I wanted to have a wide range of content to be able to create this book. So off I went on the 1st of September, set the alarm for 6 o'clock in the morning. And I wasn't a morning person, believe me, at that point in time. But the alarm went off and up I got, went and made myself a cup of coffee and took myself off for an hour from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. because I knew that with the busyness of being a mum and a wife and a banker, I wouldn't have time really to really focus on it throughout the day. So I knew that I was going to have to make a change, and it was the early morning that I knew was going to be the best and the most opportune time for me to do some writing. So I took myself off 6 a.m. to 7 a.m, wrote my thoughts and feelings down for the day, and then flipped the script into something more positive, and was creating new work every single day. And I really started to share some of my work on a daily basis. And really from that, people started to really engage with it because it became more frequent online, and people were then expecting the daily words, if you like. But little did I know, as I commenced that journey, that a global pandemic was about to hit us all, and was really going to shock everyone and impact everyone across the globe. And it was really during this time, as we moved into 2020, when I really started to see the traction online. I'd set up a LinkedIn page at the beginning of 2019. And again, friends and family were following me, and I think it's 79 followers at this point in time. But in 2020, really, LinkedIn has been was the fantastic platform, most fantastic platform for me, and it really just started to grow wings and really started to take off. And as of today, I have 185,000 global followers on my Be Inspired to Be LinkedIn page from all over the world. And the engagement, especially through that pandemic, especially with lockdowns and people at home and people seeking out a bit of inspiration online, as I was too, because I was working throughout it, I was an essential worker. But the engagement through that period especially was just fantastic. And it really encouraged me and supported me to really keep going and to dig deep on this journey. And once I had completed the year of daily writing, I got wonderful press coverage. People were very interested in this personal commitment and the impact that it had, not only on me, but on my followers, which was just wonderful. So it encouraged me to keep going. So I ended up writing every day for 2 years. And it was at the beginning of 2021 when I really said, this book has to come alive. I have to make this dream happen. And I did, and I engaged with a publisher in the Republic of Ireland called Book Hub Publishing. And I started off on my book creation journey. And what a journey it was. And again, I was still working full time, still a mommy, still a wife, still all the things that I tried to be. But it was a fantastic journey. It was a brand new experience for me, and I suppose coming from a finance and business background, I sort of felt that I was well able for the journey, but I really did learn so much, and it is quite a minefield, to be fair, creating the book. And I really wanted to make sure that the contract was correct, because I wanted to make sure that I still owned all of my material and the copyright and the distribution rights and all of those things, which I did. And basically on the 8th of December 2021, so only a few months ago, I launched my book. And here it is. So I can show you it all. And here it is. And what a proud event that was. And I was joined by very close family and friends at quite an intimate book launch. There was about 60 people. And yeah, it was just phenomenal to stand in front of my friends and family and hold my book in my hands, something that I had really worked on for 5 years, essentially from 2017. And yeah, real dream come true. And basically, from there, it became best-selling. Once it went online and I sell it through my website, it went best-selling within 3 days. And that was just absolutely overwhelming and absolutely humbling. And it was really from that Facebook and LinkedIn connections that I had built up over the previous years. I've shipped the book right across the world. I'm delighted that I have a lovely audience in America. And believe it or believe it not, that the postage to America is so expensive. It's actually more expensive to pay for the postage than it is to buy the book. But such was the demand, it was absolutely fantastic. And I'm so proud to have shipped it across the world. And the sales continue to go. And it's just wonderful to see. And from that, basically throughout last year as well, lots of changes happened within the bank. I ended up closing the branch that I was in charge of due to obviously lots of changes that's happening in the finance world. And with that came an opportunity for me to apply to take redundancy, voluntary redundancy from the organisation. And that was a momentous period as well, making that leap of faith, taking that chance, if you like, to really pursue Be Inspired to Be. And probably when I was going through that part of the journey, the most hardest, most challenging person to convince was my husband, because he's quite risk adverse. But And within a few days, he came round and basically supported me wholeheartedly in what I wanted to do. And so on the 31st of December 2021, I finished my career in the bank after almost 25 years. And as of the 1st of January, I am now a company director, and I have my company set up, Be Inspired to Be Limited, and starting on a brand new journey on the 1st of January of this year. And now 6 months in, what a whirlwind it's been. The books, you know, as the sales have been phenomenal. I've been booked for lots of speaking engagements, talking about my journey. I'm very passionate about women's health, and I have a women's health journey through my 20s and 30s. There's lots to talk about in relation to that. And yeah, it's just been the doors that have opened and the connections that I've made has just been wonderful. And really social media, and especially I go back to LinkedIn, has played a huge part in that. I'm not one to engage in video, if you like, and I know that there's certain platforms that are really heavily promoted around use of video. I'm not, you know, being negative about the use of video. I think it's a fantastic platform, but it really wasn't sort of the avenue that I wanted to go down. Mine was more photographs in terms of my quotes and commentary, and really that seemed to resonate a lot with the LinkedIn audience. And yeah, the engagement that I've had and the doors that have opened through that platform specifically has just been wonderful. And there's three things, I suppose, that when I talk about social media that I just want to maybe share with you, and that is create, connect, and collaborate. So really, in terms of social media, create your content, and create content that you're happy with, that represents you, that in 12, 24, 36 months that you can go back and say, yeah, I'm really proud of that content. So I suppose the piece is, you know, be authentic to you when it comes to social media, and don't feel pressurized into maybe doing things that you just don't feel are right for you. So use social media in a way that represents who you are and represents the message that you want to relay. In terms of connect then, so reach out to your connections. So we all have a network, and your network has a network, and so on. So reach out to those connections, send an email, send a message. You may get something back, you may not, that's okay. I was very fortunate that a couple of big global organizations who are quite huge on LinkedIn, I was able to connect with them, and they really bought into the Be Inspired to Be journey, and we've done some articles and they shared some of my work, and that all helped in terms of my reach and obviously the increase in my followers as well. And then collaborate. So again, through those connections, develop partnerships, collaborate. You might have to do things for free initially, and that's absolutely fine, but it will pay off long term, and you never know who you'll meet and what further door may open through that collaboration. So to conclude, I wanted to share with you a couple of pieces from my book, and hopefully they resonate with you, and hopefully they maybe inspire you a little as well. So firstly, the piece that I'm going to recite is called Courage. Courage is manifested through the daily steps we take, through every tough decision we have had to make. A soft whisper telling us to trust a little more, assuring us that we can open an abundant new door. Courage is that little voice, our unique intuition. Mute the doubt, and to courage, be sure to always listen. And finally, when we talk about create, connect, collaborate, I thought it was poignant to finish with this, and it's a piece called Collaborate. Through collaboration, so much can be achieved, a collection of ideas that great minds have conceived. Success can be shared, it's not meant for only one. The sky would remain dark if only one star ever shone. Reach out to others, connect and collaborate. Your goal is attainable. Go for it. Don't hesitate. Thank you.
Thanks, Belinda. Again, any questions you may have, or if you'd like further information from Belinda, please let us know on your feedback forms and we'll ensure a member of the team reaches out for you. The last speaker, before we grab a short break, is going to be tackling a subject that is absolutely crucial, but in many ways seems to have slipped down the political agenda as we've all become obsessed with oil again. However, pledges to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius haven't been forgotten, and the transformation is underway. Talking us through the different approaches being considered and the crucial role advisors and investors can play and the opportunities they can grab hold of, ladies and gentlemen, Radhika Suri, Investment Director at Fidelity International.
I think let me start with something very basic, and that is that climate change is here. It's not a future event. People often think that climate change is something that will happen to our children, but I'm here to tell you that reality shows that signs are everywhere right now. So if you think about 70% of the global glacier mass, we lost it in the last 20 years. If you think about the 2015 South Africa drought, that led to a 15% drag in output. The 2020 heat wave in Russia that nearly killed 55,000 people. I could go on, but essentially there are signs everywhere. And the window we have to contain climate change, that's shrinking really fast. The slower we act, the less time we have. And the shorter window means that we have a much higher mountain to climb. Essentially, global emissions need to fall by about 50% by 2030 and by 100% by 2050 to limit global warming by 2050. Now, if we can move to the, so sorry, Kirsty, I just noticed you hadn't moved the slide. So the slide I was talking to was is the one that comes up next. So would you like to record it again, or would you like to? Should we start from scratch, or how would you like to do it?
Let's do that. Sorry, I thought you were saying that intro bit off the first slide, the intro slides. No, that's fine. I'll move it to the first slide now. If you notice that it's not moved, just repeat and say on the next slide, and then I'll move that over.
Okay, and if you prefer me just starting off on slide 4, that's also fine.
Okay, no problem. So I start here. Yes, is this the one?
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely.
Okay. So let me start by talking about something which may seem really basic, and that is that climate change is already here. It's not a future event. It's not something that will only affect our children and our grandchildren. We're seeing signs everywhere. If you think about 70% of the global glacier mass, we've lost it in the last 20 years. If you think about the heat wave in Russia in 2020, we lost about 55,000 people. That happened recently. If you think about the 2015 South African drought, that led to a 15% lag in agricultural output. I could go on and on. The window we have to contain climate change, it's shrinking really fast. Global emissions need to fall by 50% by 2030 and by 100% by 2050 if we want to limit warming in the global world. Now, on the next slide, we can see that essentially there is some good news because there's a lot of accelerating momentum. Full decarbonisation of the global economy will essentially need an estimated investment of $144 trillion. That's 7 times the current US GDP, and that's by 2050. We are seeing huge amounts of innovation in this space, with technological solutions being developed and being deployed. We're also seeing investors become more interested in investing in different kinds of evolving opportunities right now. And investing in the right solutions means that essentially those solutions will become lower cost and they will become more scalable, which means that there's a positive momentum that gets generated behind these kind of investments. There's also a regulatory angle to the whole thing. because essentially if you see what happened with respect to, say, COP26, the fact that 140 countries or so have set net zero targets, the fact that the Europeans have come out with a EU Green Deal, all of this points to growing momentum in this space, and regulation is quite an important driver. At the same time, and possibly something we all understand, consumer behaviors are changing quite a bit, and we can see it in our day-to-day life, where we are doing more in terms of recycling, reusing, changing our demand patterns, meatless Mondays. These are all signs that consumers are paying much more heed to the climate issue. So it's not all negative out there. If we look at the next slide, what you'll see is that recent headlines would make you think otherwise, because essentially, if you think about the terrible and tragic events that are taking place in the Ukraine, a lot of the negative headlines around that are also associated with negative headlines around climate change. With talks about burning coal, it seems like the climate agenda has taken a bit of a backseat. Now, the question, I guess, that one needs to ask is, has the pace of climate change slowed? Not really. In fact, emissions rose to the highest levels in 2021. We haven't even begun to see a slowdown yet. And in the short term, all this shift to coal that we're seeing is likely to exacerbate the problem that we are facing right now. And there's a growing recognition of this, because a lot of policy announcements have come out in recent months that point to much more investment in renewables, in areas which will prompt decarbonization to take place. And spending on climate change is growing. There's no doubt about that. And that's a very good sign. However, we're just at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how much we need to spend. So if you look at the energy transition investment that took place in 2021, that was about $750 billion. But we actually need about 5 trillion of investment every year. So there's a long runway for this to take place, and there are many steps that we all need to take. I guess the good news is, and we could argue that if you look at the next slide, we could argue that the global momentum towards sustainability has actually increased in on the back of recent events. So what started with a call for decarbonization in Paris in 2016 has now basically translated into a global movement. In 2022 alone, we've seen a number of announcements take place. So to give you an example, the US SEC has come out with mandatory climate-related disclosures. The EU has brought on new regulation on the circular economy and extended producer responsibility. And the UK has said that it'll double its green hydrogen capacity. The red boxes you see on this slide are essentially pointing to change that has happened as a result of very current events. So there is a lot of regulatory thrust that's building up that supports the general cause of decarbonization. Now, when you look at the next slide, what will become really evident to you is that in recent years, we've seen a real proliferation of climate-related funds. Investors have recognized, no doubt, that there's an urgent need to combat climate change, but not all climate funds are the same, and many take very different approaches. And there's no one way of solving this problem. There will be multiple ways to solve this problem, but this can also cause quite a lot of confusion for investors. So the most widely known approach, I would say, is low carbon funds, which basically tend to own naturally low carbon emitting companies and sectors. And they do little in terms of contributing to the overall decarbonization of society. Another approach is investing in beneficiaries of climate change. So these are names like in the healthcare sector, water scarcity related names, clean air names, etc. And these names can be often found in environmental funds. And while they may definitely hedge some of the disintermediation risk that exists, they are passive beneficiaries that are not actively helping to decarbonize. We often see that they are single technology funds in the market as well. and they can have an impact, a positive impact, but they have a very narrow focus, which means they focus on one or two solutions to the problem, and there can be some risk associated with higher correlations, etc. in these funds. Then there are climate solutions funds, and essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to fuel capital into the decarbonization of society. We believe that they tend to have a higher impact in terms of decarbonization on our world and on our society. If you look at the next slide, we can talk a little bit more about the solutions that exist today. I guess the good news is that the solutions to get us closer to zero carbon, they already exist today. Over the last few decades, there's been huge amounts of both private and public investment that has gone into developing solutions to this crisis, and many, many new technologies have emerged. We've looked into how much emissions would be reduced with currently available technologies, and the result is about 80%, which is very reassuring. The remaining 20%, it can be addressed with new emerging technologies, carbon capture technologies, etc. Essentially, while this is very good news that about 80% of decarbonization solutions already exist in the world, what we do need is we need them to be adopted at an accelerated rate. And we need to do that because if we want to achieve the decarbonization targets that the world has set, we can't wait for the normal period of deployment. So if you think about autos took about 90 years for full adoption. Electric power took about 47 years. We have less than 30 years for these solutions to be deployed in the global economy so that we can meet the temperature requirements that we have to keep life on Earth existing the way we know. Now, if we move on to the next slide, please. Channeling capital into solutions, it tends to drive a very virtuous flywheel. Essentially, what you see is that as you see solutions deployed in scale, their costs come down, there's much more adoption, and that in turn reduces costs. And this happens faster than anyone anticipates. So the most interesting thing is that the speed with which costs are coming down for solutions that already exist today is something that is permanently underestimated, even by experts. So if you look at the solar example we have on the slide here, you'll see that costs came down much more quickly than the experts predicted. And they actually kept coming down much more quickly, and this meant that there was substantial adoption. And this is a lot of good news for the overall challenge that we face today. If you look at the next slide, I think that makes one of the most important points. The point here on the next slide is that essentially what we're talking about today is not future technologies. These are now technologies. So pulling out some of the headlines from the last few months, heat pumps have reached parity with boilers. 1 in 3 Britons drink plant-based milk. Renewables are growing at the fastest rate they have in over 2 decades. There's plenty of good news out there. One of the aspects that we talk about less is on the next slide, and that's the risk that comes from not doing anything at all. So there is a lot of risk hiding in conventional portfolios. These include the risks of stranded assets, of disintermediation, of new regulation, of accelerated litigation. The list goes on and on. We believe some of these can definitely be hedged by investing in climate portfolios. And so it's very important to think of both the opportunity that exists, but also the risks that you might need to hedge from the holdings you already have in your portfolios. Now, on the next slide, just a little bit on the Fidelity Sustainable Global Climate Solutions Fund. Now we are a solutions-based fund, so we only invest in companies with solutions that reduce society's carbon footprint. Given this exclusive focus on society's carbon footprint, we believe this approach has a high material impact. It also has lower risks in many ways because we invest across multiple regions, and multiple technologies, which means that essentially the disintermediation risk is lower. And if you look at the following slide, we go into a little bit more detail on the technologies we invest in today. So what you see is that the list basically has on the right-hand side the kind of emission reduction that comes from the technologies that we've listed on the left-hand side. And this list is not static. It'll evolve over time as new solutions become available. And these themes are quite interesting because some of them are more familiar. Ideas like electric vehicles, renewables, insulation, things around automation tools for farmers to reduce fertilizer usage or petrol usage. The cloud, it reduces emissions by 85% compared to traditional enterprise data centers. Meatless burgers reduce emissions by about 90% compared to beef burgers. So the opportunity set is actually quite immense, which means that we can build quite a diversified portfolio, which can use its global remit to find ideas. Now, moving to the next slide. We've talked a bit about the type of companies we are investing in and their contribution to global emissions. And using this approach, we quantify the impact of the fund. So if all the solutions we invest in today are fully adopted in the global economy, global emissions could fall by more than 80%. Here, what we're showing on the graph is the carbon footprint of the fund versus the index, but we're also looking at carbon emissions prevented by the companies the fund is invested in, and that's the big green bar on the right-hand side. So to use a simple example, we look at the amount of power, say, being generated by a utility like EDP in the portfolio, which has solar and wind assets. And then we consider the emissions we would have had if that same power would have been generated by using coal and gas to try and understand what the emissions prevented by this company are. And if you take, if you take this analysis and do it company by company, we conclude that the fund holdings are responsible for preventing about 596,000 tons of carbon. And for every additional $1 million invested in this fund, we could see emissions prevention of up to 4,200 flights from London to New York. So the opportunity is important, the opportunity is immense. The alpha opportunity is immense as well, but probably the most important is the impact that we can have on society by bringing to the fore decarbonisation solutions and making them much more mainstream. Thank you.
Radhika, thank you for that. Again, if you want any more information from Fidelity International, do let us know on the feedback forms. Now, it's time for a quick coffee, and we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. Welcome back. Our next speaker really needs no introduction. Outspoken, frank and passionate, Baroness Helena Morrissey has been making waves in the financial services industry for more than 3 decades. Founder of the 30% Club, which pushed for greater female representation on boards, she has worked tirelessly to keep the issue of diversity and inclusion in the spotlight. Now chair of AJ Bell, she's been instrumental in setting up AJ Bell's Money Matters campaign, which strives to narrow the gender investment gap and get women more comfortable talking about money and investing. Her career has been impressive, more so because she's also the mother of 9 children, and in her spare time, she's also written a couple of books. Here to share some thoughts about her experiences of delivering inclusion and diversity in the industry, the good, the bad, and the could do better, and also the work that she's doing at AJ Bell. Ladies and gentlemen, Helena Morrissey.
Hello, I'm Helena Morrissey, Chair of AJ Bell. I've had that position since this year's AGM in January, and I joined the board as a non-exec director about a year ago now. A bit of a background about me, in financial services now for about 35 years, which makes me feel pretty old. My professional background is as a fund manager. I joined Schroders in New York, actually, right at the start of my career, and was a global fixed income analyst. And then I moved back to London and began managing global bond funds, and did that for about 15 years. I joined Newton and became the CEO there in 2001. I also held that role for 15 years. And my last executive role was actually at Legal and General Investment Management, LGIM. And I was actually trying to set up a personal investing, a D2C business, a bit like you invest at AJ Bell, but AJ Bell was way ahead of us, not just one step, but several. And after, during that time, obviously, I was very much aware of what AJ Bell was doing, greatly admired the company from afar and the people who worked in it, and was really delighted to be approached to join the board. Now, alongside my day job, as it were, I've also spent a lot of time on diversity and inclusion in businesses more generally, not just in the financial sector. I founded the 30% Club in 2010, and that was originally a campaign aimed at trying to ensure that we had at least 30% female representation on UK company boards. And at the time we started, that ratio was less than 10% if you looked across the top 350 listed companies in the UK. And then there were also 150 all-male boards. Now, if we fast forward, I've got to admit, I am quite amazed, if I'm honest, about how much of a sea change there's been. Nearly 40% women on the FTSE 350 boards now, and no all-male boards. So that has been dramatic. There are now 30% clubs throughout the world today, and they're all characterized by the same approach, which is to have men and women working together in a voluntary way. This has not been through legislation or regulation. This has been about business-led change. Now, I'm delighted with all of that, but of course, we haven't quite reached gender equality in all dimensions. Not by a long shot. It's very much unfinished business. And there are lots of indicators that one can use. Often it's mentioned that we only today have about 5%, 16 female CEOs across the top 350 companies here, although now we are at almost 50 chairs, and I'm delighted to be part of that statistic. Now, the 30% Club was born out of the financial crisis, which highlighted the risk of groupthink. However brilliant individual people are together, if you put lots of people who come from a similar background, same gender, similar experiences together in a room, it's just not possible that they are the optimal team. The other driver of change you'd like to think is, of course, equality of opportunity, which really matters to me, and I'm sure to lots of you, but it wasn't enough to galvanize change. And the financial crisis, catastrophic as it was a moment to seize, to say, look, things haven't been working as well as they should. By any stretch of the imagination, there must be a better way. And obviously the results have been generated since then. Now, diversity of thought, or sometimes known as cognitive diversity, doesn't map very neatly onto what's sometimes called identity diversity. But obviously our characteristics and our experiences as the average man or the average woman do tend to vary. And similarly, of course, our age, our economic background, our education, these all have a bearing on how we think. And today, it's increasingly recognized that to get the best results from any business or any discussion or decision-making group, we need diversity in multiple dimensions. And nowadays, with the 30% Club's work sort of done, as far as I'm concerned, I chair something called the Diversity Project, which is aimed at really changing the face, literally, of the investment and savings industry. Some of it comes from my own experience. I'm very conscious. When I was a very young woman, I was the only woman in a team of 16 fund managers. It was very isolating. It can be a very chicken and egg problem to solve, because if you join, even if you're persuaded to join, it can be rather dispiriting and rather lonely experience. If we don't do anything about it in a very proactive way, then of course over time the industry will become less attractive to the undiverse talent as well. Young people today expect their colleagues, their female friends, their sisters to have just as good opportunities as they have themselves. They might be neurodiverse, they might be LGBTQ and so on. They expect diversity. And we are, even though it's been a slow start perhaps, and we are behind many other sectors, we are making progress through the Diversity Project. For a start, nearly 100 firms have signed up. There's massive commitment at this point. There's a realization that cognitive diversity is extremely important to the future of the industry. And there are a lot of different events and activities. The results have yet to follow in many respects. But a lot of these are extremely important and quite perhaps dimensions of diversity that people haven't always thought about. So for example, the Diversity Project's last 2 events have been around hiring more disabled people, and also we held one around hiring military veterans. One of the things that we're working on that I'm very excited about and wanted to share with you is that we are launching, starting next year, we've already announced it, what was called a Future Female Fund Managers Programme, and we're now just simply calling it the Diversity Project Pathway. And it does what it says on the tin. We are trying to deliberately, carefully cultivate more female fund managers. It's a stubborn problem. Today, around only 11% of fund managers in the UK are women, and that's actually down from 14% 2 decades ago. I'm happy to say I know Fidelity is partnering with AJ Bell today at these Luminary events, but they're one of the best, most stalwart members of the Diversity Project, playing a very active role in devising this programme and in the Diversity Project more generally. We're also at AJ Bell trying to do something about a nationwide problem around a lack of equality when it comes to money. Beyonce once said, money gives men the power to run things, and she's right. I firmly believe that unless we have equality of income and wealth, and also more equality at home on the domestic front, we won't really be able to have true gender equality. So you may have already seen it, AJ Bell has set up something called Money Matters. Our research suggests that there's a huge, if you add together the gap in the savings and investments between men and women in the UK, there's a giant 1.65 trillion gender investment gap. Now, I'm conscious that I'm speaking to a group who might be much more sensitized to this issue. You may well have 50-50 male and female clients. You may target female clients specifically. I think it's going to take a really significant joint effort. This has been a long-running issue. There are obviously many, many reasons behind the gender investment gap. Women do still earn less than men on average. We do take career breaks sometimes, and that obviously eats into our earnings power as well. We do tend to save less, partly of course because of that earnings gap. And if you add it all up, when we're also somewhat risk averse, tend to take out a cash ISA rather than a stocks and shares ISA. It's estimated that only around 10% of British women have a stocks and shares ISA compared with 17% of men. Well, we can see how we arise at the problem today. And a lot of the research shows some very clear things that we need to be cognizant of. It suggests that, as we might expect, women and men are motivated on average just slightly differently when it comes to managing money and their reasons to get investing. So women tend not to be quite so excited by the opportunity to just make money. We want to save and invest for specific goals, paying off a mortgage, our retirement, our children's education, a wedding, and so forth. Now, I'm not suggesting that we suddenly change the way that we approach everything when it comes to helping women to feel more confident, but Money Matters is very much about trying to show women that you can just take small steps, that you don't have to become an expert instantly. It's obviously part of our D2C offering, but I hope that if you sign up and see what's happening there, we're on social media, there's material that we put out through webinars and a podcast that I can highly recommend. I'm not in most of them. Then I hope there's something for you that you might take away and feel that's interesting as well. There's lots of other things happening at AJ Bell. I am leading or as chair of our employee voice forum. So we are working on our own diversity and inclusion, on listening to staff, making sure that we engage, that we also get feedback from the women working in our own business. I'm very excited about the next phase for AJ Bell. I do hope to meet you all soon in person. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, Helena. You know the drill by now. If you've got any questions for Helena, please put them on your feedback form and she or a member of the team will come back to you. Now it is time to hear from another of our homegrown talented speakers, Lisa Webster. Lisa has been with AJ Bell since 2014 and is one of our technical gurus responsible for providing regulatory and technical analysis to the business and beyond. She's also just completed the Leeds Triathlon event. Big up to her. This year she's had plenty of other things on her plate after the biggest shake-up in divorce law for more than half a century came into force, which made it easier than ever for couples to separate, and time after time we hear that pensions are one of the last thing considered as part of settlements, something that doesn't bode well for the gender pension gap. To talk us through the options for dealing with pensions, the pitfalls to watch out for, Senior Technical Consultant, Lisa Webster.
Hello, welcome to my session on pensions and divorce. This is quite a topical issue because we had some really big changes to divorce law earlier this year. We had the Divorce, Dissolution and Separation Act that came into force on the 6th of April 2022, which you may well be aware of, you may have heard of. It's sort of commonly referred to in the press as the no-fault divorce. So this came in and it means that now individuals in England and Wales can obtain a divorce merely by sort of filing a statement of irretrievable differences, irretrievable breakdown of the marriage or civil partnership. And you no longer have to say, that the other spouse has had intolerable behaviour, unreasonable, or done anything they shouldn't have done, or to have been separated for 2 years, which is how it used to be under the old rules. So basically, you can have a no-fault divorce. You can just agree, if both parties agree that it's not working out, you don't have to ascertain, you don't have to say blame one particular party or the other, which means we can have a lot more amicable divorces. And the objective of this is to help reduce conflict between couples, especially when there's children involved. You make the process a lot less acrimonious. And you can see, there's really good reasons for doing that. If we can do things, without having to, make accusations of the other party, blame each other. There's really good reasons for doing that. However, there is, a train of thought, and certainly, a lot of people in the industry sort of think that there has to be some caution exercised with this, because if it's a lot easier to get divorced, it's a lot easier to overlook certain things. And the obvious one which we're going to be talking about today is going to be pensions. That that people who do it, it's more straightforward to do it by yourselves as well. DIY divorce, not blaming each other. They're not necessarily going to go and seek advice, or you're not going to consider divorce. And so actually there's a higher risk of people not considering the pensions, and the situations that we have sort of the divide between men and women with their pensions, this could actually make things worse because of this change that we have. And we've seen, you know, when this first came out, say in April, you know, we saw some headlines around it at the time. You know, there's one of them here from the Daily Express. New no-fault divorce laws leaves women at risk of losing pension, and even Ulrika Johnson was talking about it on Lorraine. Apparently, you know, that's something that I can often say when I talk about pensions, that it comes up on mainstream TV. But yeah, but you know, there's more risk sort of perceived because of the disease, that it can be overlooked. And there's other reports here again back, you know, from April when it first came out. You know, these quickie divorces. You know, that more people, more women specifically, could be losing out because of the changes that we've had earlier this year. And we've seen, you know, since these laws came in place, you know, other headlines around it sort of later on, you know, divorce saying it grossly exaggerates the gender pensions gap. You know, DIY divorce is a concern, particularly to women in retirement. And, you know, one from the Telegraph here in July, you know, that matrimonial asset most divorced couples don't think to share. Everybody, when, you know, divorcing couples, the first thing they probably think about is, what do you do with the house? Who gets the house? That's probably the obvious question that, you know, people aren't going to miss that one. But, you know, the pension is normally the second most valuable asset after the property, depending, you know, circumstances, it might be more, but, you know, most cases it's the next most valuable asset. But it is so often overlooked, and unfortunately it does tend to be women that lose out on that, because we have this pensions gap. We you will have heard of, I'm sure we're all aware of the gender pay gap. And we also have the gender investment gap as well, which is something my colleagues Danny and Laura have talked about quite a lot with their Money Matters programme as well. You know, we're trying to work on that one, but also we do have, it's not just pay, it's not just investments, it's also it's very true also for pensions, a big gap between men and women's pension savings. And you know, if that's not taken into account in divorce, then that will widen the gap and make things a lot worse. So early this year, there was a report from the House of Commons where they looked at this issue. So they're looking at basically to look at what the gap is, what the main causes of the gap are, and what can be done about it to, you know, kind of, you know, make things better going forward, how we can address the gender pension gap. So some various figures out of this report, which I sort of banded around. You know, obviously they're all estimates, but there's various estimates in there. One of them, the first one, estimates the gender pension gap at 37.9%, and that's in 1920 in the UK, according to the Trade Union Prospect. 26% is a figure from the OECD report, so 26% less income from pension systems that women get compared to men in that report. There was also another one which I found from the Pensions Policy Institute in 2019, where they looked specifically at women in their 60s, so people who are starting retirement, and on average, women in their 60s had a third of the private pension savings of men, that particular sort of age group, you know, which is a massive difference. Why? I said the report moved on to sort of look at why, you know, why has that come about? Why is the gap so big? And the three main causes that they identified. The first was labour market factors. So this is, you know, time out of the market to have kids is the obvious one. If people take time out when they start a family, paying into their pension is not going to be high in their priority list. And even people that do carry on, they're probably not going to be carrying on paying in at the rate they were, you know, if they'd previously been working full time. Often when people come back to work after having children, it's part-time. I'm an example of that. You know, you come back, and also it's not just, you know, women who have children, but also elderly relatives as well. It tends to be carers, people who are caring for elderly relatives. That tends to fall disproportionately onto women rather than men. And so, yes, people will work less in paid employment because they have other caring responsibilities outside of paid employment. So that makes a big difference. Demographic differences. We live longer. Women live longer than men. So even if we had the same amount of pension savings at retirement and retired at the same age, we're going to need more money, because otherwise that's going to translate to less income to live on each year, because it's got to last for longer. And then the third one, the design of pension systems. So auto-enrolment in particular, you know, has been generally seen as a success since it came in. Obviously, they're still looking at tweaks on it, you know, whether how it can be expanded, get more people into it, whether we change the rates in the future, etc., etc. But generally, it's been very successful in getting a lot of people into a pension that weren't previously. However, it is not perfect. And one of the things that they found in this report is that it actually widens the gap between low earners and higher earners because of the way it's structured. Obviously, you have to have a certain amount of earnings before auto-enrolment kicks in, and that is per employment. And if you have two jobs, even though you might be over the threshold, if you add them together, but separately or below them, then you're not going to get auto-enrolled, and it disadvantages people who have two jobs. And that is again more likely to be women that work two jobs than men, and so that disadvantages women and causes, you know, widens the gap again in that respect. The report also looked at sort of reforms. You know, what can we do about each of these things? How can we help in each of these areas to narrow the gap? So the first one, labour market factors, was sort of centred around childcare and making childcare more affordable. So therefore make it more financially viable for women to go back to work after they've had children, preschool children in particular. Demographic differences. So this is an interesting one, and obviously this will be like sort of the focus on today, is about making pension rights a compulsory part of divorce proceedings. So, you know, this is recognising the fact, you know, that at the moment pensions are often overlooked, and when couples divorce, the women lose out on this and end up with even less. And actually, by making it compulsory for divorcing couples, that will help reduce the gap. And then the final one in terms of auto-enrolment would be to reduce the earnings trigger. So at a lower level, that will get more women into pensions that weren't previously, get them into pension savings and help narrow the gap in that way. So looking at pensions and divorce then, so ideally, so this report is recommending that pensions should always be considered with a divorce, and I would certainly think that would be the case. They should always be taken into account, definitely something we would support. So if you are looking at pensions for a divorcing couple, I'm going to start by looking sort of at the process and practicalities around that, what you need to look at, you know, where you start off with. So the first thing to do when you're looking at the pensions will be, is to value the assets, to see what pension assets there are within the marriage for both parties before you then look at how things should be split. Now, state pensions is on there. Now, that's one that people sometimes quite often will overlook. State pensions cannot be shared, but they should still be taken into account when you're looking at what each party to the marriage partnership, you know, what they have savings, so what they're going to be able to live on in later life. It will make a difference to them. Death benefits as well, you know, so they can be quite valuable, you know, if they're all with one party and the other one doesn't have any to pass on afterwards. Guarantees is you know, obviously one, it means pensions can be more valuable if, you know, if you have got obviously DB, if you've got guaranteed annuity rates and the like. The value, it can be very difficult when you're sort of looking, if somebody's got defined benefit pensions and somebody's got defined contribution pensions, that you're not comparing like for like. So obviously, yes, if you've got defined contribution pension, you can get a valuation of that pension, see what it's worth quite easily. With a DB scheme, obviously you would have to apply for a valuation, get a cash equivalent transfer value for that. But obviously, you know, what that means will be different in different circumstances, and we know that, you know, if you get a CETV from a defined benefit pension and then you transfer that to defined contribution somewhere else and you wanted to buy an annuity, you probably could buy the same annuity as you could get as a scheme pension within the DB scheme if you didn't transfer it. So they're not really equivalent. So that can get quite complicated when you try and work out the value you've got, particularly when you've got a mixture. You also have taxation issues. So, you know, what a pension is worth in one party's hands and what it's worth in somebody else's hands isn't the same. Obviously, if one's a higher rate taxpayer, one's a basic rate taxpayer, or maybe not earning even, you know, they've got the personal allowance available before they start paying tax, you know, what actually they can get out of a pension would be quite different. Obviously, age is a factor as well, because it's a different, you know, if you've got a divorcing couple who are in their 60s and they can access their pension straight away, that's quite a different scenario. If you've got somebody, you know, you've got a couple who are in their 40s and they're a long time off being able to access their pensions, you know, when you're talking about, you know, if they need income to live on now versus income in the future. So it is a complicated area on this. So if you're not sure on this, you know, it's not something you're familiar with, it's not the sort of thing you're doing all the time, one resource I would definitely recommend is this the guide to treatment of pensions on divorce from the Pensions Advisory Group. So the Pensions Advisory Group was set up for interdisciplinary discussions between there's lawyers, actuaries and financial advisors involved to achieve sort of better understandings of how to deal with pensions on divorce, more consistency, giving, you know, practical advice, giving, you know, better outcomes for people who are getting divorced. There's lots of information on there in terms of valuing assets and how you're treating particularly like DB benefits and the taxation issues and lots of things like that. It's 176 pages long, this document, so it's not light bedtime reading. It is a very in-depth report, but it's a good sort of reference document or resource. So you can find it on the Newfield Foundation website. You know, it's free to access. So yes, if you are sort of wondering about how you value assets, how you go about it, that would be a good starting point. Once you've got your valuations, then you've worked out what everybody's got, then you have some different options as to how you deal with that in the divorce. So the first option you have is offsetting, and before 1996 that was the only option that was available, and that's, you know, the premise of, you know, well, I'll have the house and somebody else, the other party will have the pension or what other assets they have, you know, offset one against the other, which in theory is very clean and straightforward, but obviously in practice doesn't always work. In terms of the values, might be wildly different. You know, if you've got a house, you can live in a house, but, you know, if you've got a pension, you can't access for 20 years, you can't live in that, and you can't live off it now, you can't use it to buy your house. So lots of things like that where it doesn't really work. You may still be able to offset to a certain amount, but yeah, depending on the circumstances, it's not always the practical answer. We then had earmarking come along, or attachment orders as they are also known. They came into force with the Pensions Act 1995, which actually came into force in 1996. And to a certain extent, they worked all right when you are in DB world, when you have people who are being paid scheme pension or an annuity. So with an earmarking or an attachment order, they're actually only paid out when the former spouse takes benefits. So the original pension scheme holder member, they keep their pension still, so they keep complete control of it, you know, keep control of the investments where it is, you know, when they take benefits. But when they actually start taking an income, a proportion of that is always paid to the ex-spouse. So this is earmarked for the ex-spouse, so it gets paid directly to them into their bank account. From the ex-spouse receiving the earmarking order, from their point of view, they have no control whatsoever on it. You know, they don't know how long they're going to get it for, they don't know when they're going to get it. It really doesn't work in pension freedoms, pension flexibility that we have now, because of course the ex, if they wanted to, may have some other pension, other assets elsewhere that they can live on, may choose never to access this pension, and so the ex actually gets nothing ever. Also, if the person receiving the earmarking order, if they remarry, then they don't get anything. When they die, there's nothing that they can have to pass on to whoever they want to. Obviously, if the person whose pension it is originally, they die, then it stops for the ex, who may, you know, survive them for years later. So it really, it's quite dated now. We still see earmarking orders that were put into place before 1996. Since 1996, before 2000. So they are still out there, but it's not something that you generally recommend putting into place now, because I say there's just no control for the ex-spouse at all, and it doesn't really work with pension flexibility. So where we are at is pension sharing orders. So pension sharing order is basically the more modern way of doing things. So let's look at that. Pension sharing orders came into force in December 2000 following the Reform and Pensions Act, and this allows people to have a clean break. So the person whose pension is being split, they have a pension debit applied, and there's a corresponding pension credit which is paid out to their ex-spouse. So the ex-spouse who's receiving the pension credit, they get to choose where that goes. That goes into a pension in their own name. They can choose where it's invested, what they do with it. They can choose when they access benefits. So it achieves that clean break. It is always expressed of a percentage of rights to be transferred. So it'll be, when it's been decided, it'll go to court. If it's amicable, the court just rubber stamp it. If not, there might be a financial order in place if it's disputed. But either way, you'll get something from the court which will say there's a percentage, and they'll say whether it's 50%, 40%, 100%, whatever it might be, of the pension rights will be transferred to the ex-spouse. Opposed to it being a monetary amount. You can only have a monetary amount written on it if it's a divorce that's gone through the courts in Scotland and gone through the Scottish system. In Scotland, it can be a percentage, or in pound sterling. The rest of the UK, it's always a percentage. You can put a pension sharing order on pretty much any kind of pension, whether it's in payment or not. Deferred pensions, it could be occupational, personal, retirement annuity contracts, section 32s, say active deferred pensioner members, that's fine. Can't do it on a state pension, as I mentioned earlier. The only other bit it can't be applied to is beneficiaries pension, which hasn't really been an issue in the past, but I think as we get further and further away from 2015, when we had the changes in death benefits, obviously we have a lot more beneficiaries now, categories of beneficiaries that we may have, adult children who have received, for their parents' pension, they have beneficiaries pension. So those, you can't have a pension sharing order on beneficiaries benefits, but they can still have on the rest of the pension, which might be just be ring fenced within the same scheme. So just a little one there to bear in mind. Normally, the pension credit will be transferred out to a scheme of the recipient's choosing. Most DB schemes, some of them will offer an internal transfer or not. So with public sector, unfunded public sector schemes where you can't transfer out, they will have a pension credit member. They will actually become a member of the scheme. So for example, if you had somebody with an NHS, in the NHS scheme was getting divorced, you can't transfer out of it, but their ex-spouse would become a pension credit member of the NHS scheme. So it would go into their own name, and in terms of accessing benefits and things, it would be based on their age, so it would still be separate, but within that scheme. A lot of any private sector DB schemes, a lot of them obviously, because they won't want to take on new members, they might not let you keep it within that scheme. They may insist on you transferring it out elsewhere with a private sector DB, if you have any of those of that. A few practical issues when you're applying a pension sharing order. First one there is property. Obviously, if you're looking at a divorcing couple and how you split their assets, if they have a property outside of the pension, it's quite obvious, you can't just split it in two. One has to buy the other party out, or they sell it and split the proceeds, however you want to do it. And the same really applies with the pension. When it's in a pension, obviously we don't have a magic wand. If somebody says there's a 50% sharing order on a pension scheme, and that pension scheme consists like 90% of it is property, then we can't actually pay out the pension sharing order without selling that property. That sounds really obvious, but we still get pension sharing orders come in when there's a property in there and they're telling us to split it, and the neighbours actually sort of worked out who the buyer is, what's going to happen, because quite often, obviously not always, but you know, quite often, if you have a commercial property in a pension scheme, it'll be the member's company that's the tenant, and you know, they don't want to sell it to a third party. So you know, if you're going to do that, they would need to have, you know, whether the company buys it back or there's enough other monies going into the pension scheme to contributions or something to pay it out, or whatever it is. But you know, these things need to be thought about before you make the decision of how to split the assets. And there may be circumstances where you may want to consider, you know, offsetting it, a bit of the pension against something else outside, if that's possible. But yeah, that's one of the big ones that can cause big problems, and having pension sharing orders, and that they can take a really long time to get paid out, because you know, if it's a liquid asset in the pension, then you potentially have an issue with that as well. The cap is representing cap drawdown. So if somebody, the member that is having their pension split, is in cap drawdown, obviously after the pension sharing order, they have to have their capped income reviewed again. It'll only apply from the next year, so obviously if they've already taken more of it, there's no penalties or anything for that, but yeah, it'll be reviewed again for the next pension year. Fees have to be agreed in the court order when it gets rubber stamped by the courts, who's paying what fees, otherwise the pension scheme can't charge them. So in relation specifically to the pension sharing order, so that should be decided whether, sometimes it's an even split, sometimes, you know, one party pays all the fees or whatever, but that's part of the agreement of the pension sharing order, is who's paying the fees in relation to splitting the pension, the admin fees associated with that. Information is an interesting one. Obviously, we quite often get requests for the ex-spouse who's going to get a share of the pension to know what's in it. But at that point in time, till it's actually been split, it is still the original member's pension, and we still have data protection. So we can't give out the information on the scheme to the ex unless the member has given us permission to. So we can only give information about the scheme to the pension scheme member, usually to their advisor, because they'll have given permission for that, and to the court. So if it's amicable, then normally the member would sign something to confirm to us that we can give the information to the ex, and that's fine, we can do that. But if it's not, and they're being awkward about things, then you know, we would only provide it to the court, and then the other would have to go by the courts to get that information on split on there. Okay, a few more things to think about. We have you can either have qualifying or disqualifying credits when you get a pension credit. So if the member whose pension is being split, they've already started taking benefits, so they've already taken their tax-free cash and they are in drawdown, then the pension credit that the ex-spouse gets paid to them will be a disqualifying pension credit, which means they don't get any PCLS from it, tax-free cash, and they can't take uncrystallised funds, pension lump sums, UFPLSs. Basically, it's because the original member's already taken tax-free cash, their ex can't get tax-free cash out of the same pot on that. But the advantage for the person receiving the pension credit is when they do start taking an income from that pot, it doesn't trigger the money purchase annual allowance, so it doesn't stop them being able to build up pension in their own rights, or limit them being able to, I should say, build up pensions in their own rights. But obviously, yeah, when you're doing the split, when you're calculating, you know, what's worth what in people's hands, that's something else to take into account, is, yeah, whether there is a tax-free element to it or not. If it's uncrystallised, so you know, the original member hasn't started taking any benefits, then when it goes across to the ex, it's a qualifying pension credit and it's treated like normal benefits. So yes, you can still take tax-free cash when you want UFPLS, but also when you start taking an income, then it does trigger the MPAA. So it's just a little slight difference to be aware of there. When it comes to implementing the pension sharing order, what you need to send to the pension scheme to put this in place is the pension sharing order itself and the annex, this is from the courts, which will be stamped by the courts on it, and it's the annex bit which actually tells us what the percentage split is. So it might be in pounds if it's a Scottish one, and it'll tell us about the fees and who's paid the fees as well. That'll be on there. You need to send the decree absolute or the final order to the pension scheme administrator as well. So the decree absolute is the old ones that pre-April 22, and then it's now a final order with the new divorce laws. It's just a change in terminology there. Send that into the pension scheme, and then importantly, along with a completed pension sharing discharge form. So unless we have all those 3 pieces of information, pension scheme administrator can't do anything with it, can't start the process of implementing the pension sharing order. So the pension sharing discharge form, that needs to tell us where you want the pension credit, the person receiving the credit, where they want it paying to. So we need to know where it's going. And surprisingly often we get the first 2 bits of information and don't get the last one, and it just sits there for quite some time before we can actually deal with a pension sharing order. And that's not really ideal for anybody, because the person whose pension scheme it is, they still have control of the investments and things, but they may be limited in terms of transfers and taking benefits until the pension sharing order is dealt with. But the person who's receiving the pension credit as well, obviously they don't have control of the investments and what's going on. So, you really want to try and get this done as soon as possible. Last section I'm going to talk about is protection. So if you do have people that are getting divorced and they have protection, pension protection, lifetime allowance protection, there's just a few things that you need to think about with this. First one is if the member whose pension is being split has primary protection from A-Day. You can't give up primary protection, but it can be reduced or lost, and they do have to inform HMRC if there is a pension debit against their pension scheme. Tell HMRC, and if it's reduced, then HMRC will give you a new certificate. Obviously, if it's lost, then you're giving up your existing one, and that's it. There's regulations that say you have to inform HMRC without undue delay. There's not a particular time on it, but that's the phrase that's used, without undue delay. The reduction applies from the effective date of the pension sharing order. So to give you an example of what would happen with somebody who had primary protection. So John had primary protection, pension rights of 3 million at A-Day, and then gets divorced in 2022, and a pension debit of £300,000 applies to his pension. Effectively, you ignore the timing issues and the fact that A-Day was 16 years ago. You literally just take the amount of the pension debit from their pension value at A-Day, and then you apply protection as if you'd applied for it then. So originally, when he applied for primary protection, when he had £3 million, the enhancement factor, because the lifetime allowance at A-Day was at 1.5 million, so it was 3 million minus 1.5 over 1.5, so he had a factor of 1. So effectively he had double the lifetime allowance. Now you treat it as if he had 2.7 million at A-Day, less than 1.5 million, divided by 1.5, so it's an enhancement factor of 0.8. So his personal lifetime allowance now, because it's based on 1.8 million, which is the underpinned lifetime allowance for primary protection purposes. So he has 1.8 million plus 0.8 times 1.8 million. So now his protection is at 3.24 million. Whereas before his divorce, it would have been 3.6 million. So that one is an example where he'd get a new certificate with a reduced factor on it for his primary protection. Jeff is another example. Again, £3 million at A-Day, but he's had a much bigger pension debit. He's got 1.6 million. Now, the problem for Jeff is if you take that 1.6 million away from the 3 million A-Day, he would only have had 1.4 million. And you had to have more than 1.5 million to qualify for primary protection. So he loses his protection completely. So before the pension debit, his lifetime allowance would have been 3.6 million, his personal lifetime allowance. But now he's had this pension debit, he's lost all his protection. So he's just on the standard lifetime allowance of 1.073 100. So he's actually lost over £2.5 million of protection for a £1.6 million debit. So that's quite significant. So obviously, if you do have wealthy clients who, big pots who are getting divorced, you would want to take that into consideration. You'd really ideally, it's the underpin that's really valuable on the primary protection. So, you'd want to keep, if possible, the pension debit to a level so he still has, even if it's just over 1.5 million at A-Day, just to keep that higher level of protection, to keep that 1.8 million underpin, and whether you can offset elsewhere to balance it out. It may or may not be possible, but it's certainly something you should be considering if you're looking at cases for people with primary protection. People who've got enhanced or fixed is a bit different. So it keeps it intact. You don't lose your enhanced or fixed protection, but obviously the amount of your pension has been reduced. You can't rebuild, because the moment you start making contributions or have relevant benefit accrual in a scheme, then you're going to lose your enhanced or fixed protection. So you just don't have the ability to rebuild your fund for what's lost, but you don't actually lose any protection for enhanced or fixed. So you don't have to do anything. You don't have to inform HMRC or anything like that. Individual protection, the last form of protection, similar to primary in the fact it can be reduced or lost. There is an obligation, you have to inform HMRC if you have a pension debit, and this is within 60 the notice has to be given to HMRC within 60 days of the date of the discharge notice related to the pension credit, and there can be fines involved if you've not done it within those 60 days. So yeah, again, another one just to be careful of. The reduction applies for the effective date of the pension sharing order. Slightly different from primary protection because there is a bit of a timing issue. So if the transfer date is more than 12 months after the date of protection, the pension debit is reduced by 5% for each tax year. I'll give some examples which explain that better, easier to understand. First one then, Joan has funds value of 1.6 million at 5th of April 14, and so she holds individual protection 14, which was at 1.5 million. If she then has a pension debit of £3,000 in June 16, the reduction, that's 2 full years after the IP14 date, so the reduction is 10% effectively, so you times the 300,000 debit by 90%, so the reduction of 270,000 is applied to the protection of 1.6, so that reduces it down to 1.33 million on that. The individual protection, second example here, we have Jill had funds valued at 1.6 million on 5th of April, holds IP14 again at 1.5 million. Pension debit of 400,000, the effective date is 15th of June 15. Reduction on that one is only 1 year since the date, so it's a 5% reduction. So it's a reduction of 380,000, reduces that 5th of April value down to 1.22 million. So the minimum value for IP14 was 1.25 million. So the protection is lost on that one. Yeah. So on the previous one, she was still above it, so he kept it. This one, it was reduced. So that was a reduced one on the previous example. On this one, the protection is lost. On the flip side of this, then, so the person receiving the pension credit, they, in certain circumstances, can have an enhancement factor to their lifetime allowance. So this is where somebody receives a pension credit post A-Day. That pension was already in payment and came into payment after A-Day, 6th of April 2006. So basically what this means is they are receiving a pension credit that has already been tested against the lifetime allowance in the hands of their ex. So it's already been tested once, and so to reflect that, they get an enhancement. So HMRC don't get 2 bites of the cherry at the same fund, basically. So your pension credit factor is the relevant amount of your qualifying credit above the LTA. So, for example, if somebody in this tax year got a £400,000 pension credit, you put the £400,000 over the current lifetime allowance, gives you a factor of 0.3727. Rounding up always happens to 2 decimal places, and it's always rounded up. So, you know, logically you'd think that should be 0.37, not 0.38, but I haven't made a mistake. That's just the way the rules are. Slightly odd, but there you go. So yeah, you always round it up. So you would have an enhancement factor in that example of 0.38 applied to the standard lifetime allowance. If your individual receiving the pension credit actually has protection in their own right, so for example, if they had fixed protection already and they had a pension credit of £400,000, it would apply to whatever their personal lifetime allowance was. So this example for fixed protection, you have protected lifetime allowance of 1.5 million, so you'd apply the 400,000 to the 1.5 million, and that would give you the enhancement factor of 0.27. And obviously when you come to take benefits, you'd use that factor applied to, again, your fixed protection, your fixed lifetime allowance. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense on that. In terms of applying for a pension credit factor, you have 5 years after the 31st of January following the tax year when the pension sharing order took effect. What that means is for somebody who had a pension sharing order in the 2016-17 tax year, 31st of January after that is 2018, then you have 5 years after that to apply. So your deadline would be 31st of January next year. And the form you use for that is the AP SS 201. That's just the form. Somebody, therefore, who was getting divorced this tax year had a pension sharing order, had a pension credit factor, they received one in this tax year. In the 22-23 tax year, the January following the tax year would be January 24, and then they have 5 years after that, so it would be 31st of January 2029 for that one to apply. Final couple of bits for an ex-spouse. If you have wealthy couples who are getting divorced, and you know, it might be that the person receiving the pension credit has protection as well. In those cases, it's likely to be both of them that would have it. If you have an ex-spouse receiving a pension credit who has enhanced or fixed protection, you have to be quite careful, because if that pension credit is transferred to a new arrangement, that would lose their protection. Because if you set up a new arrangement, apart from in certain circumstances, when you have enhanced or fixed protection, that protection is lost. However, see, if they've got protection, they must already have some pension somewhere. If you transfer it into an existing arrangement, then you're okay. Obviously, it'll depend on, you know, if they've only got, you know, a DB, public sector DB or something, then you won't have that option. But yeah, so that's just definitely one to bear in mind. You won't come across them very often, but definitely worth knowing about for those circumstances. Primary or individual protection. If somebody receives a pension credit and they already hold primary or individual protection, it will not impact their protection. They'll keep that as fine. But obviously, it means, because those are at a fixed level and then they've suddenly got more pension coming in, chances are it's not going to cover it all, but there's no direct impact in terms of them losing anything from it. Right, just to summarise then, divorce just got easier. You know, I started off talking about the new act, the new no-fault divorce, and I think there is a real danger that pensions can be overlooked. So, you know, anybody you know is getting divorced, you know, is want to make sure that people look at it properly. It's not simple when it comes to valuing pension benefits. It's not a simple monetary value, especially if you have DB schemes. You know, there's different ages, different tax positions, different guarantees, all of that. I said that reference document that I talked about from the Pensions Advisory Group is a really good tool to start with. Protection, if you have got, you know, wealthy clients with protection, then, you know, think about the impact it'll have on those protections as well. Keep things simple. That's just going back to the whole, you know, people who try and split a pension which has got property in it and it doesn't work, and you know, you try and think about things, try and offset it in those circumstances if possible. You know, and you can't just say let's transfer certain assets. You know, it is just a percentage amount of the pension. So yeah, don't try and do anything too complicated with it. That is all from me. So I hope you have found that useful, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. I don't need to remind you that you can ask questions on your feedback form, but I have anyway. Our final speaker is a powerhouse entrepreneur, advisor, investor, commentator, and she runs her own business too. She's recognized as one of the top 100 women in fintech and hosts a very successful podcast called Diversity, which is pretty handy considering today's agenda. Everything that's being talked about right now, she is all over it. And in the next 20 minutes or so, she's going to share some of the themes that she sees are dominating discussions and give us some insight into what we maybe should be thinking about. She's also a stand-up comedian, so you're in for a treat. Please welcome the wonderful Julia Streets, founder of Streets Consulting.
Hello, so my name's Julia Streets and I'm really honoured to be asked by AJ Bell to speak at your Luminary 2022 event. I think there are a number of reasons why they asked me, because I do have quite a strange mashed up life. So my day job is I'm an entrepreneur. I set up my own business advising companies from small fintechs, literally early stage companies, early stage startups, right the way through to some of the world's largest financial institutions. So that is the weird and wonderful world that is fintech, and also other technologies around the edges. So thinking about cyber, artificial intelligence, thinking about enterprise-wide platforms, that's kind of what I do all day. So clients in the UK and also clients all over the world. So I had this very sort of international point of view, as much as being a great supporter of innovation and developments here in the UK and right the way across the UK. So my comments here aren't London skewed. They're very much looking at developments across the UK. In addition to that, one of the things that I'm very concerned about at the moment, actually comes up a lot, is the conversation about talent. And I'm really quite concerned that we don't necessarily have the talent in the industry that we need today, and the talent that in the industry that we're going to need tomorrow. And so part of that is, where do we find our talent? And it won't surprise you, and I know that there have been sessions around this, about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, every story should start like this, by the way. I was standing at the House of Commons about 5 years ago at a diversity event in financial services. And there were lots of financial institutions very proudly talking about how D&I was in their DNA, how they were very committed to creating not only content, but roles to support their journey towards DE&I. And at the same time, I've met an extraordinary number of people who are doing really great grassroots work right the way across the industry to find ways in which to bring diverse pools of talent into the industry. And I've been really asking myself, why is it taking so long to change? So 5 years ago, I started a podcast. I didn't sleep that night, actually. So next morning, I called a friend of mine who's a podcast producer and said, I want to start a podcast. And I have a podcast called Diverse City Podcast. And it's all about diversity and inclusion in financial services. I'm delighted to say that we've got listeners in 50 plus countries. It's named one of the top D&I podcasts. But the reason why I mention that is because that in itself has led me to have many interesting conversations with people about talent in our industry. And the third thing is because this draws on another strand to my life, which is I'm a recovering stand-up comedian. I have performed and sold out one-woman comedy shows at the Edinburgh Fringe. I've been on the Comedy Store in Leicester Square. I've done festivals and sold out festivals around the UK. And what's happened now is it's brought all of these skills together. Partly about being on stage, partly about being on broadcast, but also my business skills and my business insights. And today I get invited to speak at and host and curate discussion with some of the biggest leaders on some of the biggest stages around the UK, but also internationally. So you imagine my joy when I got a phone call. I got an email from AJ Bell saying, look, would you come and share some thoughts about some of the big trends, some of the big topics that are coming out in discussion at many of these events and in many of the discussions that I've been having. So I want to share some ideas with you, and they're really not necessarily the ideas of Julia Streets. They are more my observations of what people are talking about, what's bubbling up as being really important to the industry today. And I want to talk about it in the form of, well, the heading of this speech is all about shifting stacks in enlightened times. And it is really about shifting stacks. And I'm going to start by sort of talking about what I mean by that. Then I'm going to go through to some of the attributes of talent and leadership, very much kind of at the front of people's minds at the moment. I'm going to take a little diversion through the weird and wonderful world of technology. And then I'm going to bring it back to some really high level, almost kind of macroeconomic geopolitical considerations, as well as thinking about what the pathway ahead might hold. All of that in about 20-25 minutes. So thanks for bearing with me. And I hope it gives you just some ideas, maybe some inspiration, and also just some things to think about. That's the objective of this speech. It's not to come across as a subject matter expert, but happy to answer any questions you may have. I've got a ton of detail behind the scenes supporting these remarks as well. So first of all, let me start with this concept of, and it's what I call actually the stack of life. So the stack of life is really, as I see it, geopolitical, macroeconomic. It's about work, it's about family, it's about friends, and also ourselves. And in this stack of life, and I call it the stack of life because it appeals to technologists, if you take each of the strata of that stack, wind back about 4 or 5 years ago, and maybe some of those were changing at any given moment. But right now, everything is changing. You know, we have to recognize what's going on with Russia and Ukraine and the implications that is having on not only how we do business, how our supply chains and our fundamentals in life, thinking about utilities and the cost of living, but also what that means in terms of how our employees are feeling and how our organizations are functioning. But then wind that down and then add in a layer of COVID. And of course, we're thinking about the macroeconomic implications of us heading into very tough economic times. And then take that even further into, therefore, what does that mean in terms of how we work? And how we work with our families and how we work with our colleagues, how we present into an office, how frequently present in an office, how much flexible working and the conditions of the future of work that we're all thinking about right now. Bring that down one level further, and our relationship with our friends and our family in terms of what they want from life. What is important to them right now? And I think a lot of people are reconsidering what COVID and the pandemic has meant in terms of their pathways and their key decisions and what matters to them. And then bring it right the way down in terms of how do we learn? How do we grow? How do we get our information and our intelligence? What do we trust? Which brands do we trust? Who do we collaborate with and do deals with on a commercial basis, but actually happy to coexist with and integrate with and draw value from and provide value to on a very fundamental basis? And that entire stack of life is changing. And the next point that I wanted to then kind of pivot to is this whole conversation that I've been hosting lots of discussions about leadership, enlightened leadership in these changing times with this stack of life that I've just talked about. And every single senior executive and every single panel discussion that I've hosted or every one-to-one fireside chat that I've been involved with, both on public stages and also behind the scenes in talking to clients, is all about how do we lead our organizations? How do we become very compelling leaders? And I would argue that in so many ways we can rip up the leadership rulebook. You know, the way we have been taught to be leaders in the past may not necessarily apply now. I mean, how do we engage with teams when some of them are on screen and some of them sitting with us? How do we adapt to how people are feeling? We talk about well-being and mental health, and this is really, really important. And what's important to our workforces? How do we attract talent and how do we retain it? And this is really emerging as the third biggest theme that is coming through. Every technology conference starts early on. The very first remarks that come from almost the opening chair's remarks, or indeed from the opening keynote, is about talent. There is a very fierce fight for talent right now. And we're thinking about really what people need in terms of talent, partly about attracting and partly about retaining. And that's where culture comes in. And obviously the leadership remarks I was making earlier. And I just wanted to share a little bit of data that I had from a panel I hosted this week, which was in the world of asset servicing and post-trade. And we asked the audience of about 400, 500 people what they thought were the three most important things when it comes to attracting talent. And joint number one was flexible working practices. And secondly, purpose. And purpose is emerging as one of the most important. What is your brand purpose? What is your organizational purpose? What is your personal purpose as a human being, as a citizen of this world? This really comes through, and particularly when we're thinking about attracting talent into our organizations. Third, then came salary. Now, then the next question behind that was how do we retain that talent? Because it's all well and good to get it in the organization, but we have to be able to keep to appeal to that talent, to retain that talent. And the top three things that came through on that, number one, clear leader, was a clear career pathway. Bringing that talent in and really showing it through strong leadership, a pathway ahead that really is going to engage and grow, both in terms of teams, both in terms of how we learn together and also how we learn individually, and basically testing our talent and putting it through its paces as much as stretching it and giving it a sense of ambition and pathway as well. Then behind that came flexible working practices, and behind that again, third came salary. Now, obviously, remuneration does really matter, but it's interesting to observe those trends that are appealing to bringing talent in and also retaining it as well. This is probably one of the biggest things that people talk about. So there I've talked about the stack of life, I've talked about leadership, and I've talked about bringing in and retaining talent as well. And then the next area that we have to absolutely recognise, and this is the most fantastic element of financial services, in my opinion, right now, is of course the roads to digital transformation, digital leadership, digital engagement, how we curate and create and design and deliver digital products and services to our customers, our investors, and also to the community and the industry, the ecosystem, as we love to call it in the world of technology. But also, what does that mean in terms of how we bring and collaborate? So the role of APIs, application programmable interfaces, which is what is connecting the data from other sources. So embedded finance, open banking, the ability for me as a consumer to basically be able to, through one device, get access to multiple sources of data to give me a holistic view of and recommendations about what's important. And that's driving not only engagement of technology, but trust. The brand really comes to play here. And that's about user interfaces that are very easy to use and are very useful, helpful and intuitive, and also add a value over time as well. But also, you know, this is recorded in the middle of Tech Week, and there's also a second technology conference going on called CogX as well. And this gives you a sense of the flavour of it. And it's interesting that this week, think about the UK, think about the UK's role. And there was a comment about particularly London being the second biggest financial centre or centre of innovations after Silicon Valley for the best place to set up technology innovation and entrepreneurship. So therefore we see the role of the startups and the scale-ups right the way across the UK, and those remarks particularly are centred in London, but I do a lot of business in the West Midlands and out into Bristol, because actually what this research that came out and the press release that came out on the back of Tech Week was saying that actually we have to call out the amazing innovation that's happening right the way across the country, and particularly think about how clusters of innovation and therefore capital and investment to support and fuel that innovation is really making a difference. But we must also think about that innovation and that entrepreneurship, not only in terms of what it does on our own shores and unlocking economic wealth, hiring talents from the regions, training, retention, and also reskilling, but also in terms of what does that mean in terms of our ability to do business internationally as well. And I think that's really interesting, but thinking about how that is all shifting, how that's shifting in terms of visas and talent to bring people in, but also our ability to do business internationally as we sit here in these interesting post-Brexit times as well. And investment is strong. You know, money is coming into the industry to support innovation. And one other aspect which comes through as well, so we've talked about the stack of life, we've talked about leadership, we've talked about talent, we've talked about innovation. A couple of other areas that are really bubbling up as being important right now are digital currencies, cryptocurrencies, thinking about non-fungible tokens, the ability to buy a fragmented ownership or a token of ownership in certain assets, and then also thinking about cryptocurrencies in their broadest sense. Now, whatever your attitude to this is, some people are saying cryptocurrencies is just simply that it's speculation. Has it reached maturity? Is it a sensible asset class? A few things that are happening in the markets that I think it's worth paying attention to. So one of them is Crypto UK is the industry association, and it's very interesting to note what they are doing in terms of reflecting and representing the industry as it goes through its phases of maturity. Full disclosure, they're actually a client, so we do support them because I think actually having an organizational industry association voice is incredibly important. Also look at the institutional adoption of cryptocurrencies as an asset class, and also how products and services are being are evolving from this. So therefore thinking about how some derivatives contracts, ETFs, this is all kind of beginning to come through right now. And I know that from having hosted many capital markets conferences, people are very much looking at this. But then the other aspect, of course, is central bank digital currencies. And we've now got 9 central banks who have their own digital currencies. So this is very much a pathway that we're along. You know, we think about the digital euro, and also the UK government has come out in support of wanting to be the leading country to support Crypto UK and welcome in crypto innovation, but also to welcome in international crypto entrepreneurs, and also is thinking about its pathway with central bank digital currencies as well. These are all undeniable trends that are happening in that area that are definitely worth taking, interesting to take care of and to take note of as well. And I think when I think about all of that is with the technology that's coming to bear, the leadership that needs to come to light, and there's a demand and an appetite to get into new and to unlock new areas within the world of digital innovation, but also some of these new asset classes that are opening up as well. And I'm sure that absolutely appeals to the world in which we all inhabit as human beings and investors, but also in the industry as a whole. But let me just take the thinking just a little notch further. So we've talked about talent and leadership, we've talked about innovation, we've talked about digital currencies and NFTs and digital assets and crypto, etc. What I do want to talk about is two very much bigger themes that are coming through. One of them is about the trends towards deglobalization. And again, I reflect on some of the discussions that we're having at Davos not so long ago, and particularly thinking about what does deglobalization mean in terms of the ability to command your own supply chain, to ability to drive and empower your local economy, to unlock wealth for your citizens, and also to be able to unlock talent in your regions as well. That's a production question, that's a manufacturing question, that's an economic collaboration question, there's policy, and of course there is national considerations around that. There's always a slightly dark side to the deglobalization debate, and I think we have to pay great heed to some of the nationalist trends and bodies that are coming through and perhaps having larger voices than they might have done necessarily before. History is always an interesting one to look at when we think about the Brexit debate, but also what that pathway ahead may be. So one of the things that we have to really think about in the context of everything I've talked about is how do we do business locally, but also how do we do business across borders and internationally as well. And I think it's interesting to note that, and this came through the Queen's Jubilee the other weekend, when the head of the Commonwealth was saying there are actually nations and jurisdictions around the world very keen to join the Commonwealth, because when you think about the backdrop of COVID and the pandemic, there is value in collaboration, but at the same time there is also importance of focusing on local, national, regional economic success, particularly as we navigate some of these interesting pathways ahead. So the deglobalization trend is one that's very much coming through in the discussions as well. And the last one I want to talk about is the metaverse and Web3, the new age of the internet, if you want to call it that. Now, this is a world that's born from gaming. It is basically putting on your VR headset and other there are all sorts of gloves and handheld devices that come to that you can use as well. But actually, this has come from the world of gaming, where you can actually live in a second universe, if you like. And there are some previous Second Life products and software and games and universes that have led us to this point. The introduction of Web3 is going to really empower this, and there are already real moves being made. People are going in and buying up virtual land. Banks and financial institutions are offering services in the metaverse. And there are kind of 3 or 4 major use cases that are being heralded as being the ones to watch. One, of course, is gaming. No question there whatsoever. The second is actually in the use of medical and thinking about how do we actually engage with patients through the metaverse. The next one is about education. How do we educate our teams, and how do we actually get involved with, maybe secondary and tertiary education through the metaverse, which means you can be anywhere in the world and taking advantage of the learning opportunities that exist out there. And of course, the models of teaching are all shifting, and there's an opportunity there as well. And then the other one that I think is particularly interesting for this audience is financial advice. And I brought this up at a trading conference in May, I think it was, and I raised this question in my opening remarks, which is, if you're not paying attention to the metaverse now, we really should be, because Citi claim that this is a $30 trillion marketplace, right? There's a market opportunity in the metaverse. And immediately, some of the buy-side firms that were involved in the conference were saying, we should be thinking about how do we engage and how do we meet our investors in the metaverse as we're providing goods, services, and also investment advice to this generation, but also the next generation of potential investors, and what economic value will that create as we go through. So it's really interesting. So if you're not paying attention to the metaverse now, I strongly recommend that you do, because this could unlock huge potential in terms of how we do business, how we get access to products and services, how we collaborate, but also there are some considerations about policy, data privacy, how do we engage, and also protection of certain minority groups as well, with protected characteristics. And of course, that all flows back into the conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We need to make sure that new products and services are fit for all, and that they are built with people who have not only diverse teams building them, but have inclusive cultures that will listen to them and engage their ideas to build better and stronger and products and services that are fit for use. But also then thinking about leadership and thinking about corporate culture and corporate structures as well. So that's where the DE&I comes to play. And take it one level further, and I've mentioned it before in my remarks about things that matter right now: purpose, the conversation about ESG, the conversation about climate change, and the conversation about how do we basically make sure that the financial world is supporting some of the innovation that is helping to address some of these major environmental, social, and governance concerns. There's a need for greater transparency. There's a need for data to support the investment products that are being built, and also the citizens' appetite to engage and lean on financial services to help create these pathways as well. Really interesting, deeply complex, and of course, one key dynamic of that is transition finance. How do we help those organizations go on this journey for improvement, changing from fossil fuels to new areas of research and development takes financing. So therefore, what is the role of financial services in the city to empower and engage with that, and to provide finance to help organizations on their transition journey? That's something that I'm paying a lot of attention to right now. So purpose, purpose, purpose. This is the driving message that is coming through. It affects how we lead our organizations, how we recruit and retain talent into our organizations, how we embrace technology and move into some of these new areas that we've talked about. Also, how we think about our pathways of adopting new platforms and new ways of working. I think they're about the metaverse, but also how we engage with policymakers and also our jurisdictions, the countries in which we operate, the towns and the cities in which we live and work. And how do we make sure that we have a pathway that is really, really fit for us all to unlock and involve social inclusion, financial inclusion, and also to educate and to skill up our talent right the way across the UK. In this really incredibly short period of time, I hope I've touched on lots of issues. I hope I've painted a picture of how they all come together. What I didn't want to do is just give you headings on a PowerPoint deck. And by the way, I think PowerPoint's like a guided meditation. You'll wake up 20 minutes later fully refreshed, but none the wiser. I wanted to paint a picture of how each of these matter, but also how they intertwine and how they come together in, again, sort of our pathways for the future, and where we must focus, where we should be investing, and what we should be thinking about. Please do get in touch. I would love to hear your thoughts about this speech. You know, was it useful? Was it helpful? But also, if you have any questions, I'd love to interact with you and happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you again to AJ Bell. It's been a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, Julia. That was our final speaker of the morning. What a great session to close out Luminary 2022. We really hope you found it insightful, useful, and yes, entertaining. If you follow the feedback link that will open immediately after the webinar ends, please do tell us how we've done today. It'll help us shape future events, providing the content that you want. And we promise it'll only take 2 minutes of your time. Now, we'll send your CPD certificate and a copy of the slides over via email in the next couple of days. Any questions for any of the speakers, please ask them on the feedback link and we'll ensure that they are passed on for a reply. Recordings from today will be available on the Info Centre, so feel free to share those with any colleagues you think might like to see them. We are finally out on the road, so if you do get a chance to come to one of our in-person events, we'd absolutely love to see you, and we'll also email over a save the date for Luminary 2023 very soon. For now though, from everyone here at AJ Bell, thank you for your continued support, and we'll see you again soon.